I also want to retread some history with you, Barbara McQuade. I mean, this is out today in the Washington Post. Former Nixon White House counsel John Dean said Monday that had the court's ruling been enforced in the early 1970s, history could have turned out very differently. Quote, as I looked at it, I realized Richard Nixon would have had a pass because the evidence against him was based on official acts the Supreme Court has deemed immune from prosecution. You can almost erect an alternate history, right? I mean, this is an extraordinary fork in the road for everyone in this country, everyone who I think if they knew much about or they knew a lot or they knew a little about the Constitution, they knew that one of our values was that no one was above the rule of law. After yesterday, one person is, the American president.
Yeah, and when the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, what they're saying is this is what it said all along. This is what the Founding Fathers meant when they wrote this more than 200 years ago. That certainly wasn't the understanding, however, during the Watergate era. As you know, Nicole, a big part of that case was the allegations that Richard Nixon had ordered the CIA to try to dissuade the FBI from investigating the burglary at the Watergate office building. That is absolutely an official act. And so under today's standard, the opinion decided yesterday, not only could President Nixon not have been charged for that order, you couldn't even use that as evidence. And so it really calls into question the consistency between yesterday's decision and the U.S. versus Nixon case, where the tapes were ordered to be turned over. If Nixon couldn't be charged with the crime, then how can you force him to turn over evidence of a crime that cannot be prosecuted? It really does, I think, put into stark relief just how questionable yesterday's decision really is. One of my least favorite portions of the opinion is where Chief Justice Roberts accuses the dissenters of engaging in fear-mongering, pointing out that as the dissenters do, that someone could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a rival or accept a bribe in exchange for a pardon. But what he never says is that it's not true. He just says that these are extreme hypotheticals. But today, really, there is nothing that would mean that a president would be charged with a crime if he were to engage in that behavior. And I think the Watergate example really brings home what a stark difference this is in our understanding of how the Constitution has worked for these 200-some years.
You know, David Jolly, a lot of people that I know and people that I don't, beloved viewers of this program, I saw people expressing fear. I'm afraid of what the court ushered in, but my colleague Rachel Maddow, as she is beloved for doing, had sort of cut right to the crux of this. Let me play that for you right now.
The rule of law is supposed to constrain the ruler. And the Supreme Court just undid that. And it's binding. And it's now the way our country is structured. And the only way out of this, the only fix to this, there's no fix to this that involves impeaching Supreme Court justices. There's no fix to this that involves a new argument or a new case. The only fix to this is to put someone in the White House from here on out who will not abuse the absolutely tyrannical power they have just been legally granted in perpetuity.
Do you agree with that? And what does that mean?
Yeah, I do. Look, Barb talked about the founders, and I think the founders did not envision a raw criminal or someone that would be willing to engage in unlawful behavior, truly unlawful behavior, occupying what appeared to be an office of great honor. And I think where the Chief Justice got it wrong, and Rachel gets it right, is it is plausible to imagine these scenarios. Look, I, as an attorney, come down, for those who followed the live breaking news yesterday, I'm more in the Chuck Rosenberg camp that this might not be as drastic as it seems, because unlawful behavior is still unlawful behavior, right? You could still, I think what Justice Roberts was saying, Chief Justice Roberts was saying is, if a president ordered SEAL Team 6 to engage in an assassination, that's unlawful and remains unlawful. However, where critics like Barb and Rachel and others are right to point out is it might be unlawful, but under yesterday's ruling, there's really no evidence you could enter into as a prosecutor that says the president engaged in this type of behavior, because of that small portion of the decision that says any any behavior that's determined to be part of an official act. And we're seeing it in New York today, where Trump's lawyer said any communication, even if it was to Michael Cohen or about a porn star or about behavior that occurred before the presidency, any communication of Donald Trump as president is in the outer shadows of the office and can't be used as evidence. That's the most restrictive part of this decision that would suggest a bad actor could engage in unlawful behavior as president and actually get away with it. That is the hardest part to reconcile here. And I think it's what you heard Joe Biden say last night. As he said, he would never abuse this office, but Donald Trump certainly would, and that makes November that much more important.
Well, I ran into Chuck Rosenberg yesterday and I said, my only thought or reaction to that analysis is that we have someone with a blueprint for doing things that are illegal that's running as a criminal. I mean, Trump has a record, as Carol and other investigative journalists chronicled, of recoiling against people at DOJ who he didn't view as loyal to him. He fires Comey because he doesn't see to it to let Mike Flynn go. He makes Sessions cry because he recuses from the Russia case. What is he afraid of in all these interactions? Criminal scrutiny. That's it. That's the whole ball game. He hands out pardons to people who he wants to commit crimes for him or who did retroactively. So I guess the SEAL Team 6 maybe. I don't find it particularly far-fetched since they were they were chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and he cheered them on. But I mean, the reporting that I asked Carol about, where he wanted the Insurrection Act invoked, that was to use any means necessary to suppress protests after the murder of George Floyd. I feel like the thoughtful legal analysis almost doesn't recognize the brazen and public nature of Trump's extrajudicial ambitions.
Nicole, you're exactly right about something because of this. You mentioned in the lead the example, and Carol's reporting is that Don McGahn stopped Donald Trump from doing that. Don McGahn's not going to be in the next White House. Rudy Giuliani will be the next type of White House counsel who will not put the brakes on a President Trump.
Carol Leonnig, I want to give you the last word. What are your thoughts as you watch, our politics as topsy-turvy as they've ever been? The White House briefing was described to me as a feeding frenzy. I didn't catch it. We're going to speak to a White House official in the next block. The Supreme Court seemingly completely unmoored from precedent, tradition, and even traditional conservative stuff. And Donald Trump seeming to evade accountability at every turn.
In one respect, Nicole, this is exactly what I expected the Supreme Court ruling would be, with a few small nuanced differences, but absolute immunity for official acts is what I was watching come down the train track. And yet seeing it today and yesterday aligned with President Biden's faltering appearance in the debates, watching people call for him to step down or at least remove himself from this race. At the same time, Donald Trump, who showed himself to not treat the office with any reverence or real focused concern on his duty to the public and to the Constitution, seeing all these things circle at the same time is worrisome. As a young journalist, one of the things that I remember my mentors teaching me over and over again was, when you're reporting on public officials, what you're trying to figure out is your bar is not have they engaged in a crime. Your bar for reporting important stories is, are they meeting the high standards that we expect for public officials who will serve the public? And right now, it feels as though a lot of our institutions are so below that bar. We are writing and reporting on things that are momentous and disturbing. And it's so far afield from my early days of holding people to account to the highest possible standard. We have a president right now who's struggling to show that he can lead for another 4 years. We have an incoming front runner for re-election who is planning to wage war against his enemies, against anyone who's disloyal to him, not the standard for serving the public and the Constitution that I was trained to report on from the earliest days.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more, September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.